Welcome to the Besh broadcast with Franco and Carl. We are taking a look at Philippine Nationals rounds 3 and 7. Round 3, we have Jonathan Visconde on Uzuri versus Justin Koo on Bravo. So this looks like a very disruptive matchup. So what do you think? What opinions do you have on this sort of game plan and the sort of thing that both heroes need to be able to pull off in order to win?
So both of these heroes have the potential to go into very grindy matchups where they have these small windows of opportunity to actually pivot and gain the tempo. For both, this is true for both players. It will depend on how they built both their decks. We were able to see Jonathan in the previous game, where he was able to win against the Briar with key tempo plays. So we'll see here how they will actually play out their decks.
And I'd also like to note that here Justin is running Titan's Fist and Steel Braid Buckler, which might inform a keen-eyed player that indeed he might be leaning a little more into fatigue as compared to usual Bravo builds. So
So the fatigue matchup for both these decks would kind of be would be tricky to navigate if they are not familiar with their opponent, what their opponent wants to do.
So we see here leading off with a nerve scalpel into an isolate, and we see this is still turn zero. So Justin still has a lot of options, and he will still be given the chance to redraw into a hand that he likes. So we'll see how Justin plays this out.
So this is one of the tricks of that Uzuri has, presenting an isolate that you can't really defend with more than one card, especially on turn zero. And Justin is incentivized to block with one card, and I think he just has to take the damage.
Well, depends on if whether that isolate turns into something more, I guess, annoying in the form of, I don't know, maybe a death touch that disincentivizes an arsenal or something of the sort.
Yeah, I think that is actually the more powerful options as a switch target for Zuri if he plays a death touch.
So here we see a switch in with Justin reacting with a Fate Foreseen, and indeed it is a death touch. So that's if I'm not mistaken, that's a red death touch. So I'm guessing that pushes
Yes,
through.
looks like it.
And we see Jonathan picking the token. And we see that he's picked a Blood Rot box. And he goes into Arsenal. And both players withdraw.
So many players would vary on what token they would give the Bravo player. Sometimes I think they would be incentivized to just give them inertia, just disallow them their arsenal for the next turn.
I would honestly think that that would have been a bigger, more long-term play. But we don't know. I think he might be looking for value at least this early in the game. So because the blood rot kind of counts as a little damage pushed through. But here we see Justin just pushing with the Titan's fist, and I guess he's paying for the blood rot and arsenaling a card, and that's his turn.
Yeah, I think one of the disadvantages of running Titan's Fist, if you don't really have the luxury to have a more powerful option with Anothos and tectonic plating, you don't have many options to cycle cards by or pitch stack your cards. So this actually helps Justin pitch stack his deck, as we can see that he pitched a Crippling Crush and the Starstruck for the second cycle.
Yep, exactly. And at the expense of not making of not making a surge token, it saves him life. So that kind of informs you that he really is going for a little more fatigue focused play style, in the sense that he's trying to preserve life. Trying to He's prioritizing defense on pushing any amount of damage, and we'll see how this plays out. So we have Jonathan again, leading on a nerve scalpel and into an isolate, which is pretty much a mirror of the previous turn.
And in terms of pitch stacking, we can see that he is pitching a Codex of Frailty, which could come in very important for the second cycle when you would want to push damage in specific times.
And to be fair, this looks like the sort of game that will lead into a second cycle. These two characters
Yep.
have very have very fatigue. I mean, not necessarily fatigue focused, but have a tendency to be able to grind out games to fatigue if the need arises. So we see Justin.
And these are usually the decks that have good blocks. Yeah, as you can see here.
So we have a block with a buckling blow and a switch in for a CNC, and the CNC goes.
This is the more annoying. Yep, the more annoying targets for the Uzuri switch, since you can't target it with. You can't defend with defense reactions from Arsenal.
And isolate into CNC is one really really good. It's one really really good sequence for Uzuri. I think it's one that
And
has only a few ways of being able to interact with, and we see Justin going
yeah,
after.
that's one of the weaknesses actually.
Okay, so we see Justin just making a surge token and a Titan's Fist and just pushing with a pommel. So at this point, he's just pushing damage, and that goes into a Fate First Scene. So what do you think was the logic behind just tossing the pommel and not arsenaling it? Do you think he's trying to deny Jonathan value of trying to hit another arsenal?
Yeah, there are many reasons for which Uzuri can disrupt the arsenal through CNCs, through inertia tokens, and it would be Justin would actually be incentivized to actually play out his entire hand the um, every turn in order to get to the second cycle much quicker. As we can see that Jonathan using Uzuri, he does not actually have very efficient 3 or 4 card hands. It would depend on what hands that what cards that he has in his hand. But usually, if he has 3 or 4 cards, maybe one of those cards cannot be used in certain times.
So we see another swing with a dagger, and Justin contemplating, I guess, on what to do next. And here, I think this is the thing you were talking about earlier, Carl, when when the Uzuri's hand doesn't necessarily play out really well, and it just turns into an extra pitch for the second dagger, and he doesn't have any follow up to that. Is that the tempo swing that Justin's looking for?
Yeah, it looks like it. We can see that he's actually pitching 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's pitching exact for the crippling crush. For this, I don't think he really wants to trigger the crush. He just wants to take cards from out from the hand of Jonathan. We can note that he is actually setting up a very good second cycle.
Perfect. Yes. I see that, especially here, in the sense that uh, we're just seeing Jonathan give cards, and most likely this will be followed up by a defense reaction, since I doubt that Jonathan wants to since I doubt that Jonathan wants any random discard to push through at this point.
Yeah, I would agree. This will likely be followed by a defense reaction.
And knowing that the fatigue base,
Um,
oh, so he is following. He's blocking with three cards, and so he's
yeah,
leaking.
I think they just had the short discussion about what was happening.
Okay, so we go back to Jonathan, who blocked with three cards, so he only has a nerve scalpel to swing, stab, whatever.
Again, this is one of the what do you call this? Less efficient things about Uzuri. If you only have one card to pitch, your daggers are effectively just 2 for 1s, as compared to Bravo, where you can convert one card into 3 or 4 damage. And with if you have tempo, if you're Bravo, you can play cards like this, such as Thunderquake, which essentially trades cards for more damage.
And this, I guess we can call this the mid game. Pushing damage, given that
Mhm.
uh, both players seem to be trying to grind out as much as they can from each other before they start tossing uh, better stuff at each other, or trying to get key cards out of each other's decks. So here we have a sink below
Yeah, and
blocking
these are
4.
exactly the key cards
And oh, it's followed up with an Oasis
and
Respite,
Oasis.
pitching a Plague Hive, so we're getting a
Pitch a
Raccoon
play
token. And the Plague Hive is pretty much an indication that Jonathan's prepared to do this for the long run, to grind out as many pitches of the Plague Hive as he can. So this gets an inertia token,
Yeah, I agree. Yes.
and so
Which actually does nothing at this point.
didn't he have a card to put in Arsenal? I think, I'm not sure. So again, we have this
Yeah, I'm
nerve
not sure
scalpel.
either.
Again, we have the nerve scalpel, uh, threatening the one, but also threatening to reduce the blocks of the next defending card. Uh, so that's pretty much the turn. Given that Jonathan has no cards in hand and he's not arsenaling
Yes,
anything.
and we've been seeing yeah, we've actually been seeing this a lot in the previous turns, where Jonathan has been forced to just pitch out his cards for attacking with his daggers. And this actually gives the tempo to Justin. If he's able to present disruption, such as Starstruck or Crippling Crush, this could this would favor Justin.
And
Like this card, if you give Bravo enough leeway to play an imposing visage followed by a showtime, you can actually find the cards such as Pulverize or Crippling Crush. And what do you think he'll get here?
it looks like he's thinking of Spinal Crush, and I guess a crippling wouldn't be too bad, but it would depend on what he's prioritizing at this point.
Mm.
And it looks like, oh, and he gets a Starstruck
Yeah,
into
what
the.
this? And I think this is fine.
Yeah, the Starstruck, perfectly fine in the sense that it's another must block along the lines of Crippling Crush, because forcing an opponent to not be able to play four or attacks that are less than 4 is kind of crippling for assassin in general, since most of Jonathan's attacks are basically 0 for 3s and 1 for 4s, or 1 for 5 in in the case of sensor, which we saw earlier. So it basically forces his hand, and we see again the
So
sequence of
this turn, I think, is very crucial for this turn is crucial for Jonathan. If he's able to disrupt that Starstruck on the next turn, it would swing the tempo to his favor. If he is not able to, Justin might just get the tempo. No, so it's just perfect with the sensor.
Okay, so that's sensor switched in, and it's pretty obvious that he can name the Starstruck in the arsenal, and it looks like he does name Starstruck, and that still leaves him with a card in arsenal. So I'd have to think that that was a good turn for him. And we see a command and conquer in his hand, so we'll
Mm-hmm.
see how he
But
follows that up later on.
so, what do you think actually about sensor in this game?
I think the sensor here is at least useful uh, in the sense that when you go against Bravo, you know what cards to prioritize, and sometimes you get situations
Mm,
like what just happened earlier when you have perfect information, you know exactly what is in Arsenal, and you can at least stop that. So we see
yeah, I agree. So we can see here.
a tear asunder into a Titan's fist, so that's going in for 5, and we will see how
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan reacts to this, since it's a little over Def React strength. So he'll be either forced to block with an equipment or to discard the 2 cards, which at this point is a very good piece of disruption, even with that small
Yeah,
of a number.
yeah. Both these players have actually been very judicious with using their equipment to block. However, we can see that Jonathan has been able to play several defense reactions as well as 2 Oasis Respite, if I'm not mistaken. So this is what Justin wants actually. He wants to um, remove all of these defense reactions and instants such as Respite in order for him to be able to push more damage when he goes to the second cycle or when he gets these key turns.
So we see a switch in with a Fate for Scene in response. This looks like a very mapped out turn on Justin's part, since that's blocking for exactly 6. Oh, and we see a follow-up shred before the resolution of the switch in, and it's a CNC. So that pushes through for, I think, 2 damage, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I think this is very mathematical in the side of Justin. I think he did expect the command and conquer at that point, but it was also planned well by Jonathan with the shred.
And here we see the follow-up of Justin. It's another Tear Asunder into another Titan's Fist swing, which Jonathan will have a harder time preventing, given that he has no arsenal at this
Mm-hmm.
point.
So it's very interesting how this game has been playing out since we note that the Justin has been using these Terra Sunders to push damage. He hasn't yet dominated any attack. I think he's still on the fatigue game plan, trying to remove cards from his opponent and getting to his key cards to continue to tempo once he has it.
Especially given that he was trying to put back a few good reds back into the deck for the potential second cycle.
Mm-hmm. One of the key cards I think in this matchup as well is if these players are playing any remembrances. Because remembrance might be big if you're able to get back several copies of Death Touch or several copies of Crippling Crush and Starstruck on the side of Justin.
And now we see Jonathan's turn, which is again a nerve scalpel. Uh, I guess this is him. I guess this is him respecting that Justin tends to play more into fatigue, and so this will be more painful against his reactions as compared to
Mm-hmm.
the spider's bite, which is usually the first dagger that is prioritized when Uzuri swings. So here we see Justin
So we
counting.
can see each other, Justin counting the cards in Jonathan's deck, looking at the threats remaining, looking at what possible switch targets Uzuri still has. He's also counting, I guess, the number of defense reactions that have already been played.
Yep, and uh, we're checking to see if he blocks, and I don't think there's much incentive for him to block here.
Justin's hand is has a spinal crush
A Spinal
and a
Crush, a
defense reaction, if
CNC,
I'm not
yeah.
mistaken.
It looks like a CNC, a Spinal Crush, a Sink Below, and I saw a blue. So Jonathan's just attacking with the Spider's Bite, so it's just the follow-up, pretty suboptimal two-dagger turn. Probably not looking to push too much damage, but trying to force Jonathan to dedicate cards to block, depending on how much he wants his arsenal, and that's a pretty big block.
Yeah.
Surgical extraction on block.
Mm-hmm. You can also see that Justin was threatening a pommel with two cards in hand. He was bluffing it to force Jonathan to block more.
I see. Again, another hallmark of the value fatigue matchup, I guess. So here, this is a hurl from Jonathan, uh, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's a hurl. I don't think this is card that's always used. The main value of this card is it's a go again card that may have some additional value if you pitch and throw a dagger at your opponent.
But again, it's not going to be given an opportunity to hit because of the sink below, and it's followed up with a leave no witnesses, one of arguably the assassin class's best attacks in the game, 0 for 4, block 3, and remove arsenal. The thing here though is that
Yeah,
there is no more arsenal to attack on Jonathan's part. So what do you think Jonathan is trying to accomplish here, Carl?
I actually think he originally wanted to um um he wanted to have more value with using the leave no witnesses, but seeing that his hand did not have any big attacks, so he opted to just block with two cards, then play a three attack go again, followed by a four attack followed by a 0 for 4. So even though this does not have any very relevant hit effect, he just wants to push damage.
And we see that it hits and but unfortunately banishes only a blue, so he doesn't get the silver for that. Uh, Finally, we see Justin using the dominate ability on Bravo and using that for a spinal crush. This is a little more threatening than the previous attacks that the two were tossing at each other.
Yeah, I agree. The most threatening attacks that Justin has are the Starstruck, the Crippling Crush, and the Spinal Crush. Among the three, Spinal Crush is the one that can basically just throw around. You don't really have to trigger it. You really just want to push damage.
And I'd argue that the Spinal Crush probably does the least against a character, a hero like Uzuri, because
Mm-hmm.
Uzuri just toss the attack and switch in anyway.
However, we can see that he is playing a um he opted to attack with this weapon.
So that pretty much means that there's oh,
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think this was the mistrigger. Maybe he misunderstood
effect of the
the
Spinal
board
Crush.
state. Um, yep, and that is very debilitating because he was basically time walked because of that mistake. And this is the opportunity for Justin to continue with the tempo and just continue attacking with dominated attacks.
And speaking of time walks, this is a second time. This is threatening a second time walk against Jonathan, and it looks like this one is going through as well. So that's 6 damage through, and
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan's going to be able to play only one attack next turn. So we'll see if he's able to switch
So
in
this has
something.
been
Go
yeah,
ahead.
the good thing about Uzuri is he has several attack reactions that could compensate for the lack of go again.
And this is a pretty
Mm,
surprising move, an enlightened strike from Arsenal on Jonathan's part. It kind of begs the question of what he has in hand. Is it something? Are these things that he wants to Arsenal? Are they defense reactions? Because I'd like to think that the enlightened strike plays a go again role, a more focused go, more for pushing damage via the go again. But playing it here for set
yeah.
means that there's something he wants to. There might be something that he wants to put in arsenal after this turn.
I agree. I think he actually got stuck with a very awkward hand that actually needed to go again. So it was a very timely spinal crush. And I think this has been piloted very well by Justin by counting the number of defense reactions that are available to Jonathan and only using the dominate ability of Bravo once these have been relatively cleared.
Yep, precisely. And because of that, Jonathan is forced into, I guess, a slightly more awkward
Mm-hmm.
situation. Like in this case, where it's perfectly blocked, and Justin uses the opportunity to sculpt his hand a little, and we'll see if that pays off in
Mm-hmm.
his next follow up. So his follow up is again the third spinal crush, pitching
The
two
third
blues.
spinal crush.
And so, do
Yeah,
you
at
think,
this point, since he had tempo for the 3 turns, he doesn't really need to dominate this time, since he just wants to take cards again.
and I think with the last one where wow, that's a three-card block. Uh, and I think the last two were
Mm-hmm.
able to push through a decent amount of damage anyway. So that's a big leg up in terms of the value game that these two are apparently trying to play. We have Jonathan going striking back with a hurl, and again, this one has go again, so we might be seeing something from the remaining card in his hand. We might be seeing some sort of follow-up to this.
Mm-hmm.
And there, we have that exact follow-up. We have a Codex of Frailty, which is most likely to
So it's a
get,
very good time for the getting a death touch or a leave no witnesses.
or leave no witnesses. I'm not sure if he has a tunic counter. I'm not sure if he has a resource on tunic for it. So we're checking to see what Justin has, and he chooses to place a crippling crush. We have the leave no witnesses, and here we see the fridge of armor that Bravo has that comes in handy for situations like this. We have two items blocking a full four.
And this incentivized the patience that Justin had in using the equipment to block. So now he's able to play the crippling crush.
So that's a crippling crush for 10 because of the frailty token, but again,
Yes.
that's still a really big. Oh, and it's dominated since he
Hmm.
has three blues. So it's dominated, and he has a surge token ready for next turn.
So unless Jonathan has any defense reactions in Arsenal, this will force his one of his equipment. So I think that's also one of the weaknesses of Codex of Frailty. Sometimes it could land you very good value if you are ahead and you're able to maintain the tempo. But if you allow your opponent to recur some key cards, such as Crippling Crush, it might be very detrimental for you.
And I also think that not factoring in the fridge that Bravo has was sort of a misplay on that in that regard, especially considering that you're tossing a 0 for 4, which is very very powerful but very very predictable as well on the part of Uzuri.
Mm-hmm.
So we see the crippling crush being blocked out and followed up by a third hurl. I think that's the third hurl.
Again, followed by a Leave No Witnesses.
And again, this is a leave no witnesses into an empty arsenal. So I think at this point he's just
Mm-hmm.
trying to push value and probably the possible contract, the possible mill that the hit does.
Yeah, I think this is one of the main weaknesses of Uzuri in general when it comes to deck building. Since you have to balance the number of big um, big attacks that you switch in, as also not neglecting to add in several go again options. And the options that we have seen here are Hurl and Enlightened Strike, but they haven't really been um, phenomenal in how they've been used.
And I also saw earlier that he has looking for a scrap in his deck, and I'm not sure how early that becomes relevant in this sort of matchup. It's a potential enlightened strike statted attack, but uh, given the
Mhm.
way this game has been playing out, I'm not sure. I'm not sure he'll be able to push damage the way he would want in this sort of situation.
I agree. The way he could get back into the game is if he is able to pivot back using several key blocks and then swinging back with a isolate into command and conquer.
Oh, and we see a pitch for an
This
Oblivion.
is Mm-hmm. It's actually very inefficient to both use the Oasis for an attack that does not have any hit effect, as well as actually pitch a card for it. So you traded two cards for 4 damage that didn't really have any hit effects.
And so we have a sensor. I think this is the second sensor we've seen so far. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really sure what he intends to name with this in case it hits. I think this is just an attempt to push damage at this point. The problem though is that he has no arsenal after this, and uh, and Justin probably knows that.
Yeah, I was thinking if what if he just pitched the sensor to play the give and take to either push damage or have recursion of an action card. Because if you present just with um, plain damage without any relevant hit effect, you give Bravo the leeway to play cards such as this, a blue 6 cost for 8 that doesn't really have any good hit effects, but it still presents 1/5 of your total life.
Precisely, especially given that the past two spinal crushes were able to most likely give Justin a decent life lead so that he wouldn't have to worry too much about Jonathan pushing damage back because at this point they could be tossing the same numbers at each other and Justin would be on the upper hand after everything.
I just like to point out the body language that we see from Justin, with both his hands folded and laid down across the table. It's like he's saying, "Okay, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do?" Because he knows that he has the tempo, and his next turns will likely be big if he's
The
not disrupted. And speaking of
Right.
disruption, this is actually a good one.
Humble. Uh, yeah, I guess in the sense that you're not allowing Bravo to toss out a big dominated attack next turn. So here we see Justin just choosing to. Is that a sink below? I guess that's a sink below. So he's just
Yeah,
letting
it's a
it
sync
hit.
below.
He's just letting it hit and not worrying about the hit effect, which is to essentially blank the hero for the next turn. And we see the follow up being a simple Titan's Fist. Uh,
Yeah,
but the thing
a very interesting play with the
with the two
Titan's Fist,
cards,
2 cards in hand, and an arsenal.
so it's very much a threatening pommel. Oh, but there's
But
a
we can see here he has a sigil.
yeah, he has a sigil in hand. So that's two
Two
sigils.
sigils.
So I guess in
So
the
this is one
sense
of the things that is very annoying.
I guess in the sense that this is a value game, that's still value accrued for Justin.
Mhm. Okay, so now we could see maybe the potential good uses of the Enlightened Strike with 5 go again, and then hopefully able to present an isolate or um any stealth card.
Or any good follow up, actually, at this point.
Yep, any good follow up.
Since Justin has an arsenal, he might be particularly vulnerable to something swapped in, like potentially surgical or a CNC. I think he hasn't played out all this command and conquers this game so far, but we will see. Speaking of Command and Conquer, here Justin blocks and just again perfectly content to pad out the damage, just taking two. And we have a follow up in the form of, if I'm not mistaken, is that Infect?
I think so. Um, for me, it's a stealth card, a blue stealth card that you can switch out for any other attack.
Basically, which is why these things are freaking hard to memorize.
Hmm. You can actually see that Justin is, I think, considering blocking with his hand. Maybe he is um, valuing his arsenal highly.
And it looks like we get just that. And no
Mm.
switch in, so we still
Mhm.
don't see what the potential switch would have been. And I think he got really good value off that turn. And Justin just following up with a Titan's Fist for four, which walks right into a Fate Foreseen.
Yeah, so that is one of the times that it's actually quite awkward to play with certain hands as Uzuri. If you're blocked out without any shred or any good switch target or both these cards at the same time, it might be difficult um, to deal damage. What they're basically doing is trading card per card.
And the thing with trading card for card is that I guess you're eventually hoping that your Plague Hive and your Switch ins give you more value in the long run as opposed to what your opponent tosses back at you. But so far, this doesn't seem to be the case as we've had several turns on Jonathan's part where he just pitched to swing two daggers and just pass, and sometimes even without an arsenal. So here we have another one of those turns, but I think he has a fuller hand this time around, so he can be threatening better threats this time.
Such as Enlightened Strike. Go again, I think?
So this is
No, no, it's for 7.
it's a enlightened strike for seven, so he's keeping that arsenal around for something. I think he's waiting for a good turn to uh, either play uh, either play that attack without having to switch it in, or probably to play it just as is if ever he finds himself on the back foot again.
Well, finally, Jonathan gets a value attack in the form of two cards for for 8 total damage.
So we see Justin having a bit of a think and
A big think,
considering whether
throwing the
to
fridge in there.
block with his equipments.
Hmm.
So he chooses to block two, and then Jonathan decides to use his Snapdragons, meaning there's probably a one or two more.
Mm.
And that's a
And his
wow,
tunic counter and the one floating
that's a
to play
pretty
the
good
shakedown.
follow up. That's a pretty good follow up. And because of the Snapdragons, Shakedown is active.
Yeah,
And
I'm not entirely sure why Justin actually blocked with his equipment at that point.
he's probably just trying to, again, pad a little damage, but that follow up that follow up most likely caught him by surprise since he wanted to keep his hand but is now has to be content with swinging just the Titan's Fist for four.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the more interesting things about playing assassin. You don't really know what they or what they're gonna do next. It's actually exciting to imagine what else LSS would bring to the assassin for the assassin in the next sets.
especially when you consider that most of their cards look either uh, just plain inefficient. But again, when they come together, like what happened previously, you get some really really threatening and really really disruptive turns. And not to mention disruptive in the sense that you're screwing around with uh, attacking at angles that most decks can't attack. So you have attacking the arsenal, you have attacking the hand, you have attacking the future arsenal with the inertia token.
And Justin is obviously looking for a way to push more damage with Bravo's ability. He now has a Starstruck in hand and three blues, if I'm not mistaken, as well as an Arsenal card. And he's really wanting to find a window in order to play out his big attacks. So we see him looking at the graveyard of Jonathan, probably checking for switch targets, since Jonathan has two cards left in his hand. So you could imagine that one of them is a stealth card and the other is the switch card.
And even more so considering that he chose to already take the nerve scalpel, and I'm betting that
Mm-hmm.
he's considering taking this spider's bite and seeing if he can just mitigate whatever the next attack is.
To the end the combat chain.
I think
So
he
is this a
closed it.
codex? Oh,
Oh, he closed the chain so that.
he, but doesn't have any follow up.
I
So
think he's just,
Justin is incentivized to just take this.
or at the very least, just block with the equipment, since it looks like he's clear for his next turn.
So we see that this is already at the end game. So each life point matters. So Justin have a very long think here about his options. He really wants to swing back while maintaining his life.
And I think I think Jonathan just tossed this out because I think he kind of understands that this is the point where you have to start pushing damage anyway. But again, I'm not sure since you're facing off against a deck that's similarly disruptive. I mean, Justin called him earlier by not blocking the two daggers. So I guess that was the point of that play.
Mm-hmm. So he's counting the number of defense reactions and oasis that are still remaining. And I don't think there are any anymore.
And here we have the usual big swing, which very, very good card. Very, very recent addition to Bravo, but has been doing really, really good work in making the deck really consistent with its disruptive swings.
Mm-hmm.
Starstruck being the fourth to sixth crippling crush most of the time.
Yeah, it's very interesting how a single card could matter so much in so many matchups. And just with the addition of this one card, it made the deck so much better.
And the fact that the fact that it's a yellow and the fact that it blocks really well and sometimes gives you enough tempo to make your own to follow up your own
Mhm.
big crush attacks is really makes it a really good
Yeah,
multi-purpose
but
tool.
this is lethal.
Oh,
So that's a very interesting game between Uzuri and Bravo. Um, it showed the patience of both players to preserve their equipment as long as possible. But it also showed the advantage of Bravo having a larger fridge and the ability to pitch more cards for the second cycle and be more efficient in general.
and I think the timing of the relevant crush attacks into hands where Jonathan didn't seem to have enough defense or good defense reactions
Mm-hmm.
remaining was really I think the big turning point at that stage. We see that the spinal crushes went through, and that last dominated Starstruck left him with little to no defenses, in the sense that even if he had defense reactions, he'd still be down, and he'd still be down cards, which would give him a hard time in trying to push through. So,
Yeah, I think Jonathan had a he had a pretty good game plan going into the game. He wanted to have value initially, then maybe continue tempo with go again attacks. But he was met with three spinal crushes in sequence, and he was not able to recover.
mm. So let's go to our next match.
Okay, so what's our next match, Franco?
Our next match is we're gonna be looking at round seven of the Swiss. It's going to be an Icelander mirror. Uh,
Yeah, so Icelander Mirror is very tricky for both players. It requires so much patience on the side uh, of both sides, and as with many wizard mirrors, the first to make a mistake will likely lose the game.
that was exactly what I was going to ask you about. Do you think this plays? Do you think this plays similarly to the Kano mirror, at least in the sense of
It,
who who flinches first, or who plays something, who tries to kill first?
I think yes, but to a slightly smaller scale, since Icelander doesn't have any very large combo attacks that Kano has. So for the Icelander mirror, what is actually important is to accrue value using your potions, using your frost hexes, and your insidious chills. So if you become impatient and just want to deal damage every turn, and your opponent is setting up for the long run, you're likely going to lose the game.
And here we see a very patient opening from Rayland, just a command and conquer, which meets two cards on block and an arsenal. So we have Boom on turn one, and we'll see if he got something good from that redraw. So we have an encased from Boom, most likely going to be fused with a
Mm-hmm.
blue frosting. So it's going in for three arcane.
So this is actually telling a lot on the size of the builds of both these players. So leading up to nationals, the two most popular builds were the Bullander list, also modified by the Imagine Bay list, as well as the Rhea Adams list. The Imagine Bay list was more Bullander focused with Wounded Bulls, Fendels, Fighting Spirits, while the Rhea Adams list had more arcane, such as Encase and Icebind. And it's interesting to see that he actually added this into the mirror.
Yeah, especially considering that Icelander, when going against the mirror, tends to tech a lot more heavily into Arcane Barrier, especially considering that Striders
Mm-hmm.
already has two and Metacarpus already has one. So the Alluvion is just uh, basically more long-term value, especially considering that this is a game that can go really long-term and can go,
Mm-hmm.
I guess through several pitch cycles. And I think players
Yeah,
have to
and
be
the way you
aware.
actually
Go ahead.
and um with regards to Alluvion, you could look at it as every damage you prevent is actually being 1 to 1.5 damage in the future per turn. So sometimes in the mirror, you don't want to present arcane damage all of the time, since it would incentivize your opponent to pitch and gain energy counters on their Alluvion Constellas. And that is why I think with regards to the builds, the one that is more advantaged is the Bull Lander list, since they have more attack actions.
And we know that Icelander into the mirror tends to side out the defense reactions since they don't really have that many good applications. We see here Rayland following up with an Ether Ice Vein. I'm not sure if that looks like a red Ether Ice Vein.
Mm-hmm.
And fusing with a Cold Snap and pitching an Ice card for that essentially means that the Channel Lake sticks around for another turn, and the Ice Vein still threatens the big 5 damage, and we have a Cold Snap threatening to become an extra card during Boom's turn.
So we can also see that Raylan could have responded with his own Waning Moon in response to the Polar Blast, but he seems does he have a card in hand? If he does, it is he has the Cold Snap,
He has the
which he
Cold Snap in
fused.
hand, which he
It
used for fusing,
simply incentivizes the he values more the arsenal instead of the immediate damage.
which I think this early on is probably the correct play, given that
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to look for turns where you have a better mass of cards than your opponent, and because those are the turns that you'll most likely be able to push damage.
On the side of Boom, I think this is a an odd time to actually play out the Polar Blast, since your opponent has a Channel Lake Frigid in play, and their Waning Moon, if you choose to play it, costs one more. So you have to throw another blue card in order to play it out. As opposed if you just want to block most of the arcane damage and then just patiently await your next turn.
And I think that's
Yeah,
what
so
he's
he
doing, pitching for barrier.
blocks, he prevents. Wait, let's wait until Boom decides what he wants to do. So this match is always very tricky. This always happens when it comes to the wizard mirrors. The confusion of whose turn is it, um, who is supposed to pitch what.
Oh, so And so we have Rayland choosing to Arsenal that cold snap, and because he pitched an ice card for the ice vein, he gets to keep his Channel Lake Frigid.
So now, let's take a look at what Boom plans to do, since he already played out his Polar Blast on the previous turn. He is basically forced to pitch two cards to play any three cost if he chooses to. But actually, in the mirror, it is actually pretty viable to just play Coronet Peak and pass. I think that is what he is doing.
And here we see Rayland choosing to cold snap in response to the
Mm-hmm.
coronet activation. I guess to draw him a card and threaten Waning Moon again.
Yeah, he also had in hand both a Fiendal's Fighting Spirit and a Raging Onslaught. So he was incentivized to actually pitch the Fiendal's Fighting Spirit so that he can see it again on the next turn.
And I guess
He's likely thinking about pitching the yeah. Go ahead.
uh, I guess he's also looking at trying to just get the Fiendal's Fighting Spirit out of his hand, since having that and the Raging Onslaught on the same hand is not really an optimal board state, or a not really optimal state of things to be considering.
So he chose not to play out the Waning Moon. And now it is his turn where he can play a reliable attack on the form of Raging Onslaught, a card that hasn't been seeing much play since the days of Prism, and now has been seeing play again in the form of an Icelander.
And it's interesting that showing that he pitched a blue that's not an ice card for this Raiding Onslaught basically means that he's conceding that the Channel Lake is it's going to be the Channel Lake's last turn of getting him any sort of resource advantage.
Mm-hmm. And for most Icelander mirrors, the player with more attack action cards will usually have the more advantage, since you're forcing your opponent to block with at least 1 to 2 cards every turn, or else take 1 to 4 damage per turn.
And even if
On the other hand, if you're
yeah,
able to play out the Mhm.
and even if they block with two cards, that's still almost always leaking one damage anyway. So that's still you being up in value for that exchange. So we see here Boom
Yes, and when it
choosing to.
goes to the opponent's turn, they don't have any cards in hand.
Yep, precisely. So
Yeah.
we see here Boom uh choosing to activate a Channel Lake Frigid on. Is this his turn?
I'm confused why there is a
Frostbite.
frostbite play.
So we see here Raylan responding with an Ice Bolt, and Boom responding with I guess that's a pitch for a Waning Moon in response.
Mm-hmm.
Like you, I'm also surprised as to why there's a frostbite here, considering that Icelander only triggers that when she plays outside her turn.
Yeah, I think this is also what they are discussing right now. Because this is definitely during Boom's turn, and no frostbites should have been um, brought out by the Channel Lake Frigid.
And again, we see here the tricky nature of not only the Wizard Mirror but the Icelander Mirror, since you have both players trying to take advantage of
Mm-hmm.
little windows in each other's sequencing.
Yeah, and this is in general very important for all Flesh and Blood players, and in particular these Wizard players. You really have to show your opponent how you exactly sequenced your plays, since any cause of confusion, it generally would lead to a bad play experience.
Especially considering that in a Wizard Mirror, both players can respond before or after the
Mm-hmm.
resolution. So if there are multiple effects pending resolution, you have windows of opportunity for either player to have priority to play instants and similar effects.
This is a wise play from the side of Rayland. Just play out the Clan Lake Frigid of your opponent, and just play the Coronet Peak while still maintaining card in hand that you can arsenal.
And I think it's relevant here that Boom doesn't have an arsenal at this point. So he's in an so he's in a slightly less vulnerable position for just using Coronet Peak as opposed to if there was something in Arsenal that could have been used to push damage.
Yes, exactly. And since he also only has three cards in hand, he is likely not. He won't be able to retain the Channel Lake Frigid for the next turns.
And we see that playing out right now. We have an Emeritus Scolding being pitched to play an Ether Hail, and it should be noted that Emeritus Scolding is not an ice card, so unless Boom has some really, really interesting follow up, that might be the last we'll be seeing of that Channel Lake Frigid.
Mm-hmm. Normally in the mirrors, you would like to time your Channel Lake Frigids at very opportune times when your opponent um, has ways to deal more damage,
But then,
such as when they play Scar for the Scar, um, or wider turns. And in general, it's very tricky to know when to actually play them out.
speaking of tricky, here we have another really, really patient play on Raylan's part. He's just pitching for a command and conquer. He has a card remaining in hand, possibly to pay for any potential arcane damage that might be coming out of the arsenal. Again, a very patient play on Raylan's part. He has one card remaining in hand, so there's a big chance that's something that can pay for Arcane Barrier in case of, and it gets two cards from Boom. Very interesting
Yeah,
play.
also interesting to note that Boom wasn't able to play out his arsenal, signifying that it may be a defense reaction.
So we have Boom attacking back with his own Fiendal's fighting spirit, and Raylan possibly considering if there's a way for him to push damage or to uh, get
Mm-hmm.
some get some tempo advantage. Seeing as there is he doesn't seem to have any cards in hand this time around. Oh, that's a
Oh,
very
it's the perfect
interesting
card
play.
to actually push damage.
So we
So
have
this actually presents a parity of damage, trading 7 for 7.
And I'm not sure if Boom's behind enough on life for the Fiendal's fighting spirit trigger to be relevant. But here, yeah, we're essentially looking at damage parity, so 7 for 7. And the fact that that was an off turn from Rayland is a very interesting exchange.
Mm-hmm. So again, Raylan showing immense patience, just pitching for Coronet's Peak, leaving a card that he can pitch if Boom decides to pitch for and play out an arcane damage attack.
And I think that's exactly what we're seeing here. So that's a blue Ice Vein since it was played at an instant speed. Uh, Fused. So that's coming in for 3 in response to the Coronet Peak, I guess.
Yeah, and Rayland is incentivized to just pitch his cards out since he would have to discard it from the the fused ether ice vein if he doesn't block everything.
And that still means he's not receiving any damage from that exchange. So the fact that that trades for the arsenal of Boom, I guess, is a pretty decent exchange on his part.
Yeah, but this will actually be very efficient on the side of Boom if he is able to pitch another blue to play to activate the waning moon for 2 resources, then paying the 1 resource needed for the coronet peak.
I'm not sure what exactly happened there, if that was another card pitched for the Waning Moon or what. But anyway, we see Raylan drawing back, and it's Boom's turn to come in with his own Coronet Peak activation. And
So more or less, Boom actually had he actually had a window to deal damage there, but since he had no more cards in hand, he just uh, had to do the activate the coronet peak.
again, we see that these both players trying to be very patient with their plays, just being content to activate Coronet Peak. And here we see Rayland tossing an Ether Hail that looks like a blue Ether Hail, so that's probably just swinging in for 2, uh,
Mm-hmm.
with most likely a Waning Moon follow up.
Um, I'm not seeing any pitch cards from the side of Boom in order to play out this Insidious Chill.
I think he's still okay, so I think he's still deciding what to pitch in order to play this Insidious Chill. Interesting play here in the sense that Insidious Chill is one of those cards that lets you, I guess, assemble critical turns more
Mm-hmm.
easily and push damage a lot more quickly. So if that sticks around and is able to do work, then we might be seeing this game swing in Boom's favor.
Yeah, these are the turns where you have to sacrifice some your life total in order to play out energy potions, insidious chills, in order to establish a board state that could better either prevent damage on the form of energy potions or have some sort of disruption in the forms of insidious chills. So this is investment for the late game.
So we see that the waning moon is paid for by the AB, and we have the ether hail still pending, and Boom's is content to pay for
Yeah.
that with AB as well, uh, and then use the alluvion counters to toss his
Alluvian. Mm-hmm.
to toss his own waning moon activation.
Yeah, I think it's pretty efficient use of the alluvion since for the mirror you would expect uh, to gain a lot of energy counters from your alluvion, so you'd like to use them as efficiently as possible.
And the fact that alluvion only keeps around two activations worth of counters is
Mm-hmm.
a not insignificant thing, especially when you time and when you consider the optimal timing to be tossing those free activations, especially when you probably don't have good cards in hand, or when there are cards that you'd rather keep in hand.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that I wasn't really a fan of Encase in the mirror because it's a three that's very easily blockable. But for this particular turn, it has use since you could activate the. It's basically another added activation of the Insidious Chill, similar to a Brain Freeze or a Ether Ice Vein.
But here, I think Boom's choosing not to fuse with the encase,
Mm.
probably to maintain the counters on Insidious Chill for a more more efficient turn.
Hmm. Either that or he does not have a fuse card, an ice card.
Uh, which is equally likely, given that these decks
Mm.
run a not insignificant number of blues and reds that have no ice in them whatsoever. So you have your warmongers and uh,
Mm.
your uh, your brain freezes and your emeritus scoldings.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so another efficient play from Rayland, um, playing a red Raging Onslaught, forcing Boom to block with two cards
And those are
and two good
two.
cards.
And the fact that that's two ether ice veins is not insignificant
Mm.
as well, given that that is usually the card you want to trigger for Insidious Chill.
Yep, and that's the name of the game when it comes to the mirror. Efficiency, trying to um, uh, be more efficient than your opponent, and finding these windows to deal more damage.
And here we see Boom swinging back with his own Raging Onslaught. So I think these guys might have more similar deck compositions than we think.
Hmm. One of the things that you should watch out for, however, when it comes to these long grindy matchups, is you have to be aware of the time remaining, especially when it comes to the Swiss rounds, since it is a very there is a very high likelihood that you could go to time, even if you play in a relatively what you say normal pace. But in such a grindy, intense matchup, um, you just have to play just a little bit quicker.
And I think that's what Rayland's trying to do here. I'm not sure if this Scar for a Scar has go again. It most likely has, given that he only blocked with one card from the earlier Raging Onslaught. And yep, there's a second
Mm-hmm.
Scar for a Scar, meaning that he still has go again.
So Scar for a Scar is a very good addition to these Bullander decks or even to the Ray Adams list. If they play Scar for a Scar, since it's a very versatile card, if you're down life, you can play the Scar into an Ice Vein, or you can play a Scar into a Coronet Peak. It's basically a very efficient card as a 0 for 4 with the possibility of go again.
And here we see a very conservative arsenal from Rayland, probably watching out for any damage push from Boom. But Boom just playing patiently as well, and just content to just swing back with another Fendel's Fighting Spirit. 3 for 7s.
Yeah, and
That's the name of the game.
these are these are the very tiny decision points that matter when it comes to the mirror. Decide what to pitch, what to play, and what to arsenal. And sometimes, if you arsenal the wrong card, it could punish you in the long run. Sometimes, actually, in the mirror, if you arsenal blue arcane cards too much, you're actually giving your opponent more chances to pitch to their alluvion, since you're giving them the opportunity to pitch during their turn and then your turn, basically having enough counters for an activation of Waning Moon. So it's very tricky to navigate that part.
And I think that's something the players are also keeping in mind, given that this one is an Ether Ice Vein fused, just played on Rayland's turn. So I think he's trying to make sure that he's not giving Boom too many chances to use his Alluvion. Uh, we have
Mm-hmm.
the Ether Ice Vein actually hitting a card, which is
Yeah,
very
this signifies to me that he has a another red card in hand.
yeah. It looks like a hand that's a blue and a red going to swing back, which is interesting given that
Yeah, surprisingly,
that's a frost hex that Rayland is most likely going to be sticking into Arsenal. And like the Insidious Chill before that, Frost Hex is one of the cards that can be relied upon to swing an advantage.
yeah, but I think Frostex is actually the trickier one to play. You don't really want to give your opponent the opportunity to get rid of your Frostbite tokens when they still have the chance, since it would basically make your Frost Hex useless and deal no damage.
So
On the other hand, Insidious Chill is just generally good value.
so we see here the interactions playing out. So that's Raylan paying 2 for the Insidious Chill trigger, and we have an Ice Vein coming in. It looks like a red Ice Vein, so if that's a red Ice Vein, he's placing down 5 arcane damage and the possibility of needing to pay 2 more in order to avoid discarding a card.
Yeah, that's the thing when it comes to setting up your Insidious Chills early. It allows you to actually snowball into more insidious kills if you're able to find these turns when you can play Ether Ice Veins and strip 2 to 3 cards from your opponent.
And we see here another really, really patient play. And I guess this is another angle that Raylan's trying to push by bringing out a
Mm.
Frost Hex against Boom. And again, here we see the tricky board states that the Icelander mirror tends to create, in that frostbites are flowing back and forth.
Yeah, exactly. This was in response to what?
This was in response to, yeah, I'm guessing that, I think that this was in response to the Frost Hex that Raylan played on his turn. So now we have small
Yeah,
windows of opportunity here. We have the Frostbite
yeah. I
Waining.
think they got confused.
Yeah, it looks like it.
Hmm. Yeah, the tricky part here is um, you don't actually want to play out the Channel Lake Frigid on this turn specifically, since you know that your opponent does not really have any follow ups, and you won't have much value from playing the Channel Lake Frigid out. It will just stand there for another turn and maybe disrupt the next turn, but playing it out this turn does not have any value at all. But let's see what is in the hand of Boom.
I guess the value, if ever, is the fact that he can toss out, he can play more safely into whatever Raylan has for follow up. But I'm not sure if that's the intention
Mm-hmm.
here, especially considering that
Now,
Raylan,
one of the
especially considering that Rayland basically paid for the waning moon and just forfeited an arsenal.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the more difficult things that you have to learn as an Icelander is to when to play out your Channel Lake Frigids. It's not generally not a good idea to play them out every opportunity that you have. You want to play them out when they have the most value.
I think the difficulty is I think the difficulty is in the understanding that channel lakes have different I guess priorities in the sense that there are better and worse times to play Channel Lake Frigid against certain matchups. Because if you face down your usual aggro decks, then Channel Lake Frigids are basically value the moment they come out. But in this sort of matchup, though, where you're just trying to swing or just trying to toss one thing after another and not really trying to stack effects on top of each other, it becomes a really, really much more complicated question.
Mm-hmm. Because basically, what you're trying to tax when you play out Channel Lake Frigid in the mirror is what your opponent can do on your turn. So you should um, you should analyze if your opponent will still have an arsenal, if your opponent is planning to have a big turn. So it really depends on your game plan. In addition, it also taxes the 3 for 7s, making them 4 for 7s, which would suck.
I think we have that playing out right now in the sense that Raylan has a 3 for 7 that it doesn't look like he plans to play it out since that's not so good value
Mm-hmm.
for him, and that additionally leaves him with his guard down against
Mm-hmm.
anything that Boom can toss his way, given that Boom has a full hand, even though he has no arsenal.
Yeah, I think this is the more optimal play that he could do. So at least play out an encase fuse while maintaining a one resource floating and the blue that he can arsenal for the next turn.
Oh wait, Boom did have an arsenal, so that's a polar blast on his part.
Yeah, likely to be followed up by a waning moon. So Polar Blast is one of the more powerful cards on the side of Icelander. That and Cold Snap, they allow you to they are essentially cantrips that you can play from Arsenal and draw you another card. You can basically play it for free if you pitch a blue, and as well you could also activate your Waning Moon.
And again, here it's not so relevant, but in certain matchups, that's the main source of your frostbite. So it's that one disruption that can screw up an opponent's entire turn most of the time.
Yes, exactly. So this is also I think Boom is also playing um, thinking that Rayland would have the Channel Lake Frigid in his arsenal for the next turn, but Rayland showing patience here and pitching to the arcane damage and basically gaining more energy counters on his Alluvion. So we're now going into the grindier parts of the game. A lot of the threats have already been played out, and you can see the incremental value that the Insidious Chill has been the presence of the Insidious Chill has been giving to Boom. Even though he has only activated it once, the threat of it being there is very scary for his opponent.
But you, it kind of begs a question of is he trying to set up a second Insidious Chill? Uh, and this is given the context that he was blocking with most of his Ice Veins earlier, and I think he tossed up
Mm,
blue earlier in the game. So would could he be running out of fuse effects to use for the Insidious Chill? I'm not sure if that's what he was
mm,
counting his graveyard for, but that could be
I'm
one of the questions.
yeah, I'm not sure either. Since if you notice, he also pitched a Insidious Chill. I wonder what he put in Arsenal um, instead of the Insidious Chill. Because in general, what I would like to think the Icelanders would do would set up all the Insidious Chills and all the energy potions. And we haven't seen any energy potion so far.
Would you know
So he like yeah.
if the Rhea arcane damage heavy build uses energy potions in the sideboard?
Not all of the versions play energy potions. Since it's mainly used for the mirror and for Kano. Some opt to add two, some remove them completely. And I think actually that puts them into a disadvantage in the mirror. So we actually saw that Boom valued putting the Channel Lake Frigid into Arsenal instead of the Insidious Chill. which I think is a very odd choice, since Channel Lake Frigid doesn't really have um, a very high value unless you just plan to race.
Yeah, unless you follow up the Channel Lake Frigid with something that allows you to push some form of damage,
Mm-hmm.
whether arcane or physical, you're not getting that much value out of that card, as opposed to an Insidious Chill, where if, particularly if you have the second one in play, can be backbreaking in this
Mm-hmm.
sort of matchup.
Yes. Yeah. Two Insidious Chills in play will net you almost three cards, and having three, as well as an Aether Ice Vein, you can take the entire hand of your opponent, which you would want to do on your own turn, and you would want to finish the opponent off during their turn.
Again, it's the two good turn philosophy that wizards have, to be able to push on your own turn and to be able to finish off an opponent during their turn when their hopefully defenses are at their weakest, since they've probably dedicated cards to uh, defending against your push on your turn.
Yeah, it's usually how wizards finish the game. You can see here that one of the cards that is not in all Icelander decks, the red Aether Hail, it is basically a replacement for either um, Wounded Bull or Fendel's Fighting Spirit. If you don't want to put those cards in, since you can play a blue and deal 4 damage with the Aether Hail and follow up with a um, Waning Moon. So it's two cards for 6.
And I've also seen red ether hail come into play sometimes for 4 HP dragons, kind of playing a role similar to Scar for a Scar. And also, red ether hail does work in metas where you don't have a lot of arcane barriers, since pushing 4 against opponents with
Correct.
1 AB tends to get the job done.
Yeah, and this was the kind of deck that was hedged towards the large number of Lexis that were playing in the national season. Because most of these decks don't have much AB. They usually have 1 to 2 AB.
Usually one, care of Bullseye Bracers, rest in peace.
Mm. So I think this is the turn of Rayland.
Yep, it looks like, since he paid for Arcane Barrier earlier.
Again, with the difficulty um, of watching a wizard mirror. Sometimes you get lost in whose turn it is.
And I think here, Raylan's probably just trying to consider whether to play at all, especially especially considering he has an Insidious Chill that would really do work if it went into the arsenal, and it looks like
Mhm.
that's what we get.
So this is a very dangerous play on the side of Boom, where he opted to play out almost his entire hand to play an Ice Eternal for 8, paying 8 resources, so dealing
Four.
4 damage and creating 4 Frostbites.
I think at this point, what he was looking for was a way to fuse and just push the Insidious chill, since, like I said earlier, he seems to be running out of ice veins in deck.
Also, however, despite the number of cards that he was able to pitch this turn, he was not able to pitch two blues, two ice cards. So that means the Chan Lake Fridge is going bye bye at the end of the turn. End of his turn.
But I guess having the four
Mm,
frostbites is an interesting, I guess, cover for the fact that the Channel Lake Frigid is going away.
and I think this is fine. He does not have any frost hexes in play on his side. So actually, this is just for damage. And Rayland is actually just incentivized to block the 4 damage and just allow the frostbites to resolve.
But here, I think he's
It would be
he's
much
playing the
scarier if they had frost hexes.
but here he's playing the Insidious Chill into the Ice Eternal. I think he's trying to do that just to get maximum value of his cards
Yeah.
without uh without needing to discard cards for the chill trigger and whatnot.
Hmm.
And the fact that,
Yeah, I think this plays fine.
like what you said, since Boom doesn't have a frost hex on Rayland, these four frostbite tokens aren't really doing a lot.
Yes. Um, it's basically a wasted Insidious Chill counter. Some heated pointing at this point. Maybe the matchup was too chilly.
Again, we have the complicated board state dilemma, but it looks like they've had that
Um,
solved. I'm not sure what's happening. I think the Insidious Chill was supposed to enter play.
yeah, I agree. Um, I'm not entirely sure what happened, since if I'm not mistaken, he played out the Insidious Chill from Arsenal while also pitching cards for the
The opposing chill trigger.
damage from the, yeah.
So uh, I'm not sure what exactly happened there, but
Me too. um, from what I understand, they were actually at time was already called at the um during Boom's last turn, so that was already the um turn 0 and turn 1.
so that was a turn. So that was damage at turn one when Rayland had no cards in hand. I am guessing.
Yeah.
I see. So yeah, I guess that wraps up round seven of the Swiss rounds for the Philippine nationals. Join us for, I guess, rounds eight and nine in a future video.
Yep. Followed by the playoffs.